This was an important meeting, and Plum was understandably nervous. She'd been working for the organization for a long time, almost 100 years, but most of that time had been in production. She'd only transferred to materials acquisition about 15 years ago. There'd been a lot of progress over the past century or so, but some of the departments at the head office were still pretty much boys' clubs. Plum had paid her dues. When she'd moved over to Matak, she'd had to start again at the very bottom and work her way up. She'd fetched coffee for the other elves, and written the minutes of every meeting she could work her way into. She'd discovered pretty quickly that she had a good eye for which projects were likely to succeed, and which ones were vanity projects for older elves who had stopped taking risks around the turn of the last century. She kept her head down and avoided calling attention to herself, but because she took the notes and wrote up the minutes for a lot of the high-level meetings, she made sure there was a record of her being part of successful projects, and her name was mysteriously absent from the minutes of the ones that crashed and burned. Over time, the algorithm picked up on this, and her performance rating rose steadily. Even so, there was no doubt about it. This meeting was a test. Once each year, a representative from Matak was sent to meet with a member of the Krampus team. Say what you like about him, but Krampus had a gift for long-range planning. And gift wasn't a term that the elves threw around lightly. He needed a dependable supply of birch switches each year, and had spent much of the Cold War years building contacts in Poland and Latvia, investing in birch features. He now controlled much of the commercial birch and oak forests in Central and Eastern Europe through a complex network of holding companies. All of which Plum admired in concept, but she felt unnerved at the prospect of being in charge of negotiating for next year's supply of the high-quality wood the workshop needed for traditional toys. The rumour was that Krampco's chief negotiator, Gunnar, was a tough piece of work. Eats elves like us for breakfast, was the general consensus. In other words, Plum had been set up to fail. On paper, this meeting looked like a big step up her professional ladder, but only if she could succeed, which the Old Boy Elves Club clearly thought she had no chance of doing. She thought about asking Mrs. Claus for advice. Plum was friendly with her secretary, Marzipan. They were in the same book club and would sometimes proofread each other's Dobby fanfiction, and she was pretty sure Marcy could get her in to see the First Lady for 10 minutes or so on short notice. After some consideration, though, Plum decided against it. Arguably the most powerful woman in the world, the Mrs. wouldn't have much experience in being underrated. But thinking about Marcy led Plum to a new train of thought. Plum invited the other elf out for tea, and asked her if she knew any of the administrative support staff at Krampco. Marcy thought about it for a minute, and eventually remembered the name of a gargoyle she'd been in a kickboxing class with a few years ago. She checked the contacts on her phone and pulled up her email address for Plum. She likes super dark licorice, Marcy told her, the salty kind. Plum shuddered briefly, then thanked her and changed the subject. The following Thursday, Plum arrived early to her meeting at Krampco. She looked up Doreen the gargoyle and thanked her for the help she'd given her leading up to this meeting. They chatted briefly, and Plum left a large box of licorice on the corner of her desk. Doreen walked her to the conference room and left her with a promise to check in soon with Coco and Mallet. When Gunnar arrived a few minutes later, Plum stood to greet him, smiled, and offered her hand. She introduced herself using her full name, Sugar Plum, and said how pleased she was to finally meet him in person. His reputation was formidable, she told him, and she was a big fan. Gunnar, who looked like nothing so much as a 7-foot-tall, hungover Viking in an Italian suit, was taken off guard. Plum, on the other hand, could stop traffic today. She wore a conservative business suit, but her friend Tinsel had styled her hair to show off her long neck and pointed ears. Because of their large eyes and naturally rosy cheeks, elves rarely wear makeup, which make them particularly arresting on the rare occasion when they do. Tinsel, who had been in charge of painting dolls' faces since the time of Napoleon, was, of course, an expert. And Plum looked beautiful without being overtly sexy. The Crampco negotiator stared at her for a moment, then grunted and shook her hand, and they each took a seat. Before getting down to business, Plum opened her briefcase and presented Gunnar with a gift. 2 action figures that she had had worked up by a friend in Dolls and Collectibles. They were incredibly accurate likeness of Gunnar himself. One in a business suit like the one he was wearing now, and one less formal one, with torn jeans and a vintage Iron Maiden t-shirt. "I understand you have young sons," she told the large man. "Yeah," he admitted. "Twins. They'll love these. Monstock." In spite of his bloodshot, shaggy appearance, Gunnar had not become one of the top negotiators in the industry by being stupid. He fixed Plum with a roomy stare, then pointed to the action figures with his chin. "What's this then?" he asked her. Plum had spent the past week looking over the records of all the previous negotiations Matak had had with Gunnar. She eventually found a pattern. Where her male counterparts had failed, she realized was in standing up to the huge Crampco rep. They tried to go toe-to-toe with him and show that they were as tough as he was, which, of course, they weren't. So, Plum had decided to sidestep male bravado entirely. "I'd like to be as successful as you," she told Gunnar, smiling and looking him in the eye. "I'd like to be the one who meets with you going forward, and I want the 2 of us to be on good terms." Gunnar grunted and raised an eyebrow. "No," Plum said. "Nothing like that. I'd just like these meetings to be friendly. It would be useful if both of us could look forward to them." Radical honesty is risky, but it can be extremely powerful when it works. Pringle, whose unfortunate name predated the invention of the potato chip, pulled out his pocket watch and checked the time. "She should have been back here a couple of hours ago," he announced. This announcement would have had more impact if he hadn't made it 3 times already. "She probably had to stop and have a good cry," his brother Jingle said, with the slightest hint of a smile. Director Tannenbaum, the department head, sighed and started to say something when the door to the office opened and Plum strode in. She looked a little rough around the edges. A dozen rounds of mallet will do that to an elf, but there was a definite twinkle in her eye. "Well?" Tannenbaum asked. The male elves looked at Plum expectantly. "I got him locked in at 5% above market wholesale for the next 3 years, she said, dropping a folder with the signed contract on his desk. The atmosphere in the room could be best described as a stunned silence. "Good night, gentlemen," Plum said with a smile, then turned and left the office in search of a hot shower and some soft pajamas.
Okay, well, we are neck deep in the holiday season, so today we're going to make something called Elf on the Shelf. It always helps with these drinks that are supposed to be blisteringly cold to chill the glass. Now, we're chilling a type of a glass called a Nick and Nora. For once, we're not using a cocktail shaker. We're using a mixing glass. And this calls for a few more ingredients than we usually use. We're going to go with 1 1/3 ounces of Blanco tequila. Yep, that looks good. Okay, so 1 1/3 ounces of that. And we're going to go with 1/2 ounce of dry sherry. I think we don't drink enough sherry. We should drink more sherry in this culture. And this tends to call... Oh, okay. Yeah, let's go with some elderflower. That's another half an ounce, equal amounts. And I don't know why I'm being so cautious. It's not going to explode. Okay. Elderflower is one of those flavors that you can't quite identify but when you taste it, you're like, there's a floral note there. Okay, and we're going to go with a 1/4 ounce. Now, that's kind of hard to measure out, but a 1/4 ounce of some orange liqueur. In this case, we're going to go with orange curacao. I like this particular one because it's a little less sweet. It's more of a dry. Okay, now we're using a mixing glass. There's some cocktails, like actual martinis, that just benefit from not getting completely shaken up. It changes the texture. It's very weird. Martini snobs will talk about bruising the gin in the martini. Now, clearly that's not what's going on here, but this lets us, oh, look at that. It's like liquid gold. Oh, so beautiful. Okay, anyway, the last ingredient, usually this calls for grenadine, but since we're still dealing with cranberry season, 1/2 a teaspoon of cranberry syrup. And you just pour it in there without mixing it in. And because the syrup is a little heavier than the alcohol, it will settle to the bottom and make just this lovely little painting of a drink. Okay. You got the tequila right up front, but it's the sherry that really makes this. You taste the sherry and you're like, Now, this is a fairly intense cocktail, so you could theoretically add a little seltzer to it or just drink it very cold. It's the season for cold joy.